Today's the day we talk about Woman in the Yard. Is this one different from all the other movies about trauma this year? Let's talk about it.
Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we will be discussing or debating The Woman in the Yard. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. Movie recommendation time. So, Daniel, what's the best recent thing that you've seen?
So the best thing I watched this week is Novocaine, which is currently in cinemas. It's a 2025 action comedy film about a guy who cannot feel any pain due to a medical condition. So he works in a bank, he's kind of managing this condition, and he's already lived way past his life expectancy because he's built his entire life around managing this condition and making sure he doesn't accidentally kill himself because he cannot feel any pain. And then he meets this woman at work and they really hit it off. He's kind of resigned himself to kind of not really living life, right? Because he cannot take any risks. He basically has to live in a very carefully constructed world, right? And then he meets this woman who kind of encourages him to step a little bit outside of his boundaries. And then there's a bank robbery on Christmas Eve. He's the assistant manager, so he is forced to give the bank robbers the combination to the vault, and they take his girlfriend as a hostage. And he basically goes after them because the police are not going to get there quickly enough. And it basically turns into this chase movie where he's trying to track her down and trying to find a way to free her. His big asset is that he cannot feel pain, and so no matter how much punishment he takes and how many fights he gets into, because he doesn't feel any pain, there's no real stopping him, and kind of the plot kind of progresses from there. So when I first saw the trailer for this, I said, okay, fine. Like, this is an original story. It seems like a good time. It seems like well-crafted action. And the movie gave me all of that, so that's nice. But it also, like, the character is really likable, and the story actually goes a little bit further than what you see from the trailers in terms of, like, the characters and their interactions and this emotional journey that this main character goes on. It's not perfect. It's got some, like, the ending specifically has some issues, but it's just a good ride. It's an original story. It's a small scale. It makes good use of its premise, which is this guy can't feel any pain, so he gets into one situation after the next that makes good use of that. So it pretty much does everything right. Like, so far, it's kind of this year's The Fall Guy, which is also kind of about like an action anti-hero who brings a very specific skill set to the action sequences. And it's not generic, but it is well crafted action that is just a good time. So I really recommend that.
Ambulance. That is a good film, a very good film. I remember I watched it in cinema as well. I actually love that film. I think that's like a hidden gem, underrated. I wouldn't say it's underrated because I think it is rated by the people that watched it, but I'd definitely say it's like a hidden gem. I don't think a lot of people have seen it. Maybe they have, I'm not too sure. But it's starring much two adopted brothers end up doing a money heist, and then it goes completely wrong. But where the selling point is pretty much like a mixture of money heist in the beginning, but then it turns into like a whole Fast and Furious type of vibe. But it's all happening inside the ambulance while like so much things are happening, especially while basically a cop is dying in the ambulance, the one that they shot accidentally. So then they're trying to save him because it was supposed to go from a simple mission to now, even though they were facing a lot, even though they were going to face a lot of time, specifically they get caught for the heist. Now it's turning even muckier and messier because now they have a cop that they're trying to save while they're running away from the police in the ambulance with a whole car chase madness happening in a freaking ambulance van. And it's a really, I enjoyed it. It's a fun film. This is like, there's nothing to the storyline. The storyline is pretty, I wouldn't say generic, but it's predictable in a way. However, it's fun. It's very fun. And what's obviously the selling point is obviously the car chases and how they kind of get out of certain situations. And the performances as well, of course. So I'd recommend Ambulance. The main event, Woman in the Yard. Daniel, for people who don't know what this movie is about, can you please let them know a synopsis, a mini one?
So The Woman in the Yard is a story about a single mother living with her two children in a farmhouse somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Her husband has recently died in a car accident that left her with a severe injury that she's recovering from, and she's struggling to keep herself together She's dealing with the loss of her husband. She's dealing with bills to be paid, and she needs to look after her children, and she needs to, recover from her medical issues and so on, all at the same time. And it's just too much. And then this strange figure appears in the yard, which is this woman wearing like a kind of a veil, and she just sits there in the yard, and she just watches them, and she keeps coming closer and closer. And every time they try to speak to her, she kind of just makes these cryptic remarks about how today's the day. The entire thing is essentially an allegory for grief and suicidal tendencies. So the entire movie essentially focuses on the mother's mental state and her experiences and her way of dealing with all these different kinds of stress, and how she's trying to handle it, and how she's slowly kind of losing grip of the situation. And kind of the plot kind of unfolds as the woman in the yard kind of becomes an increasingly threatening presence. So what did you think of Woman in the Yard?
This was a film that had me sit through the credits, sitting there thinking. And I haven't done that before. How many times I sit through credits is Marvel, or if I'm with someone and we're just talking. This one, I actually sat through the credit scene. It was just lingering. I was just like trying to understand everything that happened, but especially with the ending, which obviously we'll get to. And I mean all of this in a good way. I was surprisingly surprised that this film was a good movie, because the way that it was presented, it seemed pretty generic. There was a lot of layers, what I can say. And I enjoyed watching those layers. I was trying to figure out what happened. I think I understood 75% of what was going on. It's just mainly the end kind of left me dumbfounded. But overall, I'm surprised that it's received such a negative reaction. I don't know what the Rotten Tomatoes scores are looking like now, but before it was looking pretty low. But yeah, I don't understand why. But overall, for me, I had a really good time. It's just the ending confused me, and certain things confused me as well, especially the woman in the yard. I understand that she was a metaphor, and she was a representation, a mental representation from what I thought. However, that caused problems and plot holes for me while watching the movie, because if she is a mental representation of pretty much mental illness and battling with suicide and obviously grief and that, how did the kids see her? And there's other issues too, but we'll get into that. But overall, I was pleasantly surprised. Well, this was a film which I didn't think there was going to be much to. I just thought it was going to be a generic Blumhouse horror film, but it wasn't. It was definitely a psychological one that stays in your mind and has you thinking like, oh, okay, it just has you thinking and trying to figure out what happened, and then you end up, not if you're smart enough, but you'll end up kind of figuring out as well what happened. But yeah, it was definitely a brain picker.
Yeah, I had a very similar reaction to it. So I've been a broken record in the last few months about how tired I am of movies that talk about grief and trauma and like related topics. Mostly because I think many of them are very rote. Most of them don't have very much to say, or are very authentic to the topic they say they are talking about. And like I think we can make some comparisons with some of those movies, like in the spoiler section. So I did not walk, like I was kind of dreading this one. I was kind of saying, oh, not another one like this. And then I watched it, and within the first few minutes, things were starting to look up. I was really impressed by how careful it was, how detail oriented it was, how good the performance was of specifically of Danielle Deadwyler. I don't think I've seen anything else, but she is this movie. She doesn't just carry it; she is this movie, right? And it's very much a character study. It's very much focused on that one character and her mental state and her experiences and what goes through her head. And I think on that part it really works, and it absolutely does what it wants to do and what it needs to do, and I think it does that well. I think the metaphor at the center of it is a little bit broken, and I'm not even sure about that. Normally, like that's like the one thing that really like sticks out to me. Like, oh, this simply does not work, right? Like I understand what the movie was trying to do, and here are the 5 different ways in which it doesn't work. And here I have just some thoughts or some questions, and I think it mostly works, and it certainly works on the emotional, on the human level, and on the subjective level of one person's experience. So I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. And it's been very interesting to see people's reactions to this, which we'll get into.
And by the way, she played. I'm sure I've seen more of her, but her main role that I've seen her in was she played the mother. Well, she was the main character, but she played the mother of Emmett Till, the Emmett Till film. So
Yeah. She also was in Carry On. I think she was the girlfriend in Carry On, which we talked about a few months ago, which obviously is not a huge movie, but it's where we saw her.
yeah,
And I don't think I've seen the other ones that she's been in.
I'll check out that one.
But yeah, she's been in a bunch of stuff. Yeah, so I think we both kind of liked it, right?
Yeah. No, we did, and I think we should just get straight to the agree because we pretty much said our first impressions of it. So, who was the woman? Because I know, I know who the woman is, but because the way that she was presented doesn't make sense. So, to you, who do you think the woman was?
So my interpretation is that the woman in the yard is the dark voice. If you've ever been depressed, you've got these thoughts that pop into your head. And sometimes they go away, and for some people they never go away. And that's the part where I'm not entirely sure. I think I have a feeling that they're kind of mixing metaphors here. So part of it is that she's the dark thoughts, right? So she says that today's the day, which basically means today's date is the day where you end it, right? This is the one where you give up. This is it, right? And then towards the very end, she kind of coaxes Ramona into probably committing suicide, right? Like when she's sitting alone in the attic on the chair that is the same chair that the woman is sitting on in the yard, right? Like this rusty old chair in the attic, that is the exact same chair that the woman sits on in the yard, right? And so she becomes the woman in the yard at the end when she sits down on that chair. And she takes the shotgun and it cuts away. At least for the minute, it's left ambiguous whether or not she will go through with it. So in my interpretation is that this is the dark thoughts, right? This is the voice that whispers in your ear to end it, that there's no point, that there's no point in going on and so on, right? But that only makes sense half the time.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of little details where that interpretation does not make sense. So obviously there's also the Grim Reaper imagery, right? Like the black veil makes her look a lot like a Grim Reaper, which would make her an omen that death is coming. But then the Grim Reaper usually isn't an active participant, but here the woman is actually attacking the family and she's actually taking action to influence Ramona, right? And so that would be unusual for a Grim Reaper. So I'm kind of partial to the dark thoughts interpretation.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole bunch of stuff that can't be reconciled with that.
Exactly.
So what was your interpretation?
No, the same. I thought she was, like I said, I thought she was a mental representation of her dark thoughts and of suicide. And I'm sure, even though I've never, had those type of thoughts, but I'm sure people who do have those type of thoughts, it's like a thing in your mind that can kind of like form into what we just saw. It could form into like the woman in the yard. You know what I'm saying? It can form into different type of realities for different people. However, the woman in the yard is something that I can see, right? So in that sense, if she was a mental representation, that's perfect. That was great. Especially like near the end when she ended up turning it into the woman in the yard, and you see from her POV what's going on. It's like like that's for me. That was really nice. That was like a really nice touch because I could see how all of that happened, and you know what I'm saying, I can see how that came to fruition.
There's one scene that really, I think, really drives home this idea that the woman is the dark thoughts, and that is when she tries to convince Ramona that her children will be better off if she kills herself.
Yeah, that's definitely,
because that is textbook depression.
Yeah,
right. This idea that you are a burden on everybody else, and everything will be fine if only you are gone.
Yeah.
That was the part that I think was the most obvious, right? Because before, in many scenes, it's kind of ambiguous what exactly she represents. But in that scene, that's crystal clear, I thought.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Why I'm a bit confused is because paranormal activity was going on. And when paranormal activity was going on, I was trying to rationalize it. I said to myself, maybe it's a thing where, sometimes where there's a threat, right? But you can't see the threat. As in, like, the mum's the only one that can see the threat. Because they're children, they're kind of, like, following her lead. So maybe things were happening that she can see, but the kids can't see. But because they're kind of, like, they're under the mum's authority, they're getting more scared. Have you ever heard when parents say, don't cry, like, don't kind of, like, reinforce the child's behavior? So if, for example, a child falls down, don't run to them straight away. Look at them, see how they react, and then see how they respond. Because if you kind of like go in worried, that kind of triggers them to cry. So I felt like it was this kind of situation where I tried to rationalize. I said, okay, maybe it's a thing where they're kind of like seeing how the mom's responding, and she can see danger, and she can see like madness, what's going on. So they like, even though they can't see it, obviously they're kind of like seeing how she's responding. So they're going off how she's acting, and one's really young, by the way, one's a little girl, and even though the guy is a teenager and he can kind of like think for himself in a way, he's still like, he's still under his mom's authority to an extent. So I tried to rationalize it like that. However, I said to myself, that rationality is a bit ridiculous because he's still a teenage boy, number one. So that possibility didn't work. And then another possibility, I thought to myself, maybe what we were seeing was events that already happened. As in, like, these were events that already happened in her head. It was an imagination. It was a fantasy, like a dark fantasy. I tried to rationalize that, but that kind of didn't make sense either because of the ending. Yeah, so I'm a bit confused as what the intention was. Was it a mixture of both? So that's what I thought. Was it a mixture of both? Was it a thing where it was a mixture of paranormal activity going on, and it was like her mental illness and the whole, battle of, suicide and stuff that was going on? So I wasn't sure what was going on. So I just thought maybe it was a mixture of two. It had to be a mixture of two.
I think there are clear clues that the woman is the suicidal thoughts, right?
Yeah.
But there are a few different things, and you've mentioned a few of them where that doesn't really work. So one of them is that why the children can see her. So if this is in Ramona's head, why can they see her and interact with her, right? Specifically, the son gets independent information from the woman, right? He talks to her and gets information that Ramona never told him, which is that on the day his father died, so Ramona was driving, and she caused the accident because she was upset. She was generally unhappy with her life, and she blamed her husband for it. And there was an accident, and she was driving at the time, but the children have been told that he was driving, and so they didn't blame her for it, right? But then in the flashback, we see that she was in fact driving, and the son finds this out from the woman. Now, if the woman stands for Ramona's dark thoughts, then how does this work? Like, how does it fit? How does that fit together? I don't think it does. Another aspect in this is the woman just sitting and watching, right? The dark thoughts actually intrude, right? They just pop up in your life and they start whispering in your ear, and they try to influence you. But the woman, for the most part, simply just sits and waits, right? And just borderline taunts Ramona, right? But she does very little. It's just creepy that there's somebody sitting in your yard, right? Not entirely sure that metaphor really works, like in that particular instance. And then another one is when the woman actually attacks, right? So first of all, it turns out that the woman uses sunlight to attack, right? So if something is in sunlight, then the woman can attack, and so they figure out that they need to close the blinds, and that protects them from the woman, right? So it's not just enough to barricade the doors and windows, they actually have to close them, right? Now, how does that fit together with the metaphor, right? Because I don't think it does. And
No, it does.
because, I mean, I guess in the sense that people who are depressed shut themselves away from the world, right? But that does not make the thoughts go away. That means you're alone with the thoughts.
Yeah, but she's trying, her shutting the lights. She's trying to keep her locked in those dark thoughts.
But keeping out the light keeps the woman out, right? The woman tries to attack, and she does so with the shadows, and this is a pretty cool effect, by the way, that her hand's shadow kind of reaches to objects, and that's how she moves the objects, and that's how she tries to attack the children. By closing the blinds, you're protecting yourself from the woman. And I don't think that fits together with the idea of keeping out the dark thoughts, because I don't know. I don't think the pieces fit together.
Well, because light represents obviously life, and darkness represents death. And remember, this is about suicide. So Ramona's the one that's putting herself in the darkness. Remember, because suicide is you're kind of like killing yourself. So the dark force or the woman was pushing her to close the lights. So to kind of like,
that's not what happens. Huh? What happens is that the woman attacks, and then the son figures out that closing the blinds keeps the woman away. The woman does not entice Ramona to shut herself off from the world. It kind of she does, in the sense that they lock themselves in to keep the woman out, but the way you hide from or you deflect the danger is to draw the blinds. So I don't know, like it's a mixed bag. It's not that it's completely broken, but I don't think that part really sings. So that is kind of my overall big criticism of this movie, is that this is clearly allegorical, right? So the woman is the personification of this whole concept, right? And if that's the case, it really has to work. The way she fits into the story and the way she influences characters and events has to map to the thing that it's an allegory for. That is how metaphors work, right? It cannot simply be a superficial similarity or connection. It actually has to map to each other. And I don't think it really does. It does in the very end when she convinces Ramona that her children will be better off if she kills herself. But that's about it. Like in the other scenes, it simply does not map, I don't think. And like it's not that it never maps, but like it's a mixed bag, right? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And the instances where it doesn't are too many. And then, in addition to that, there's about a 15-minute sequence somewhere in the middle where the woman attacks. And at that point, it just becomes a generic Blumhouse ghost movie, right? Where I don't exactly know why, like she's knocking over stuff and why she's going after the children. You can say, okay, like this is kind of Ramona's grief spilling over to the children, but I think it's quite messy. And I think that part is something where, at least as I was watching it, those 15 minutes where the woman attacks and they start hiding in the attic, that is where it's suddenly shot like a standard Blumhouse low-budget horror movie. That's where I was the least engaged. And before and after that, it is not a typical Blumhouse movie. And in fact, I was in an almost empty theater where I think there were 4 other people, and they were all teenagers, or like early 20s maybe, and they had expected a schlocky movie to make fun of, and they could not process what they were seeing. They were giggling through the entire thing, because that was the only reaction they had to a Blumhouse movie. They could not get it into their heads that this was like a serious story, which you can like or dislike, or you can say it doesn't quite work, or it doesn't connect with me, whatever, but it is a serious story that it tries to be, right? And there's nothing funny in this movie, but they were laughing the entire time. I think that goes towards people not really knowing what to expect from this movie, which we'll get to in a minute, I think. But it's in the beginning and the end, it's a very distinctive, very deliberate kind of story, right? That is not just the standard template, and that is my criticism of like cheap horror in general, where it's all kind of the same, it all feels the same, the characters are all the same, there's very cliche beats, and here it's not, right? Like as you follow Ramona's day and about how just making breakfast is a problem, right? And the bills keep piling up, and like one thing goes wrong after the next, and everything that goes wrong just makes everything else that much harder. Like that already works, and it's not generic. And then there's these 15 minutes in the middle where it's just a Blumhouse movie. And I think, like, just as we're talking about things that don't quite work, I think that's really up there.
But with the whole 15 minutes that you're referring to, I saw that as her self-destruction because it just reinforces the effects of suicide. It's just the point where I just didn't... Just because I don't know if what was, like, if she... You know what? Could we say that she was already dead? And the reason why I say that, right?
Well, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we've covered like the metaphor thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you agree that it doesn't always quite work?
Yeah, no, I definitely.
Or do you think it all fits together?
No, definitely. I agree that it doesn't quite work, obviously, and I've said why. It's pretty much the same as yours. That's what kind of takes away from, the film being about mental, her being just like the human embodiment of mental health, because the kids can see it. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, and I think it could possibly, so just about everything in this movie could be explained, right? Like, or at least you can see the author's intention, and it, like, people who are around people who are depressed like this, it affects them, right? And I think the children seeing the woman, I think, is part of that, right? That her, like, Ramona's grief is spilling over onto them, and it's impacting their lives as well, right? And there's nothing Ramona can do about it. Just like, she's not doing it on purpose. It just happens, right? But then shouldn't they start seeing the woman at a later point? Right? Like why do they see the exact same thing? Exactly. This could have been polished a little bit more, but it's a lot better than most other movies like this. And that kind of leads into, like, we mentioned this idea of, is Ramona dead the entire time? And there's a few different interpretations, right? So one of the things that's really been like setting the internet on fire is the thing about the backwards writing. There's a YouTube channel I follow that mostly does horror movies, and when the guy put up a review of this movie, so basically throughout the movie there's a few different instances where there's writing that's backwards. Right? It happens twice that I recognized. Once was when Annie is practicing her writing exercises and she keeps writing the R backwards. And then again, when there's a flashback to the date, right, that ended in the accident. After they leave the restaurant, there's a cinema in the background, and the movie title has the R's backwards. It's the second one. Third one is at the very end when Ramona has her happy end, right? So the farm has been refurbished, the children are back, the dog is back, paintings have been painted that she's been meaning to paint. Everything she said throughout the movie she can't do, she's done, right? And then the last shot of the movie is her painting, and then it's signed with her name Ramona, but Ramona is spelled backwards, like a mirror image. Now, half the people who see this say that only the R was backwards and the rest of the name was forwards, and the other half say the entire name is backwards. Now, I saw this review before I went to see the movie, and so I paid attention to it, and I saw the entire name mirrored. What did you see? What do you remember?
Okay, so one thing I would definitely say is I want to watch the movie again because what you said about watch out for the end was lingering in my mind the whole time. So that when the end came, I didn't know what to look at. I was like, wait, should I look at the painting? Because like even when there was a painting, the painting looked a bit strange, but it looked like there was like a figure there, which I'm assuming was Ramona. But then there was a figure in the middle. So I didn't necessarily, like, I saw the name, but from what I can remember, I feel like, but even if it's backwards, it still kind of looks the same because O is the same. O-M-N-A are still all the same. So it's just the R which is going to be kind of like mirrored. So
the end also is
yeah, you're right, sorry, and the end. But so I wasn't necessarily.
But it's also the order of the letters. So I'm sure it's like it goes from right to left.
Yeah.
R-A-M-O-N-A.
I think
I'm sure the entire name is backwards.
From what I could remember, from what I can see, I feel like the image in my head right now is that the R was backwards, but everything else was.
So here's the thing. I paid special attention to this. Like every time there was text on screen, I paid attention to it because I knew about the controversy. And to my knowledge, the last scene is the only time an entire word is backwards. In every other instance, it's only the R's. Annie's writing, only the R's are backwards. And on the cinema billboard, there's two R's in the movie title, and one of them is backwards and the other isn't. So we have something that is real, right? Her argument with the children is real, and then it kind of turns into a fantasy where she fantasizes about stabbing Annie because she's getting on her nerves so much, right? And then she snaps out of it, and it's not clear how much of it is fantasy and how much of it's real.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess any time she's been writing, it had to have been a fantasy. And then in the flashback, which is also in Ramona's head, the R's are also backwards, but only the R's, not the entire words. And then at the very end, where it's clearly a fantasy, right? Because according to the logic of the movie, no time has passed, but the farm is completely changed, right? And there the entire name is backwards. So I don't know what this means.
Same.
But it's a very clear pattern, right? So it's not simply that all writing is backwards, because there's this thing about, I don't think it's even true, but it's a thing people say that you cannot read text while you're sleeping. Like you cannot dream text. I've never experienced this. I don't think it's true, but it's like a thing people say. So it makes sense that anything that is not real has the jumbled text in it or the mirrored text in it. But the last sequence, which I think is what happens after she's actually committed suicide, because that's where she gets her happy ending. That's a fantasy.
Yeah.
Because it's a fantasy, the writing is backwards.
Yeah. Especially with the end, when obviously the end sequence where she ends up with her family and pretty much her perfect happy ending. To me, that was like, okay. Because you know the saying about life flashes between your eyes.
Before your eyes.
Yeah, before your eyes. Yeah, so I thought, okay, so everything else that we saw before that scene was pretty much just a fantasy. It was a dream. And obviously, you know, dreams, like, wacky stuff happens in dreams. I just assumed, obviously, and what I think reinforces that is because there was a lot of hallucinations and there were flashbacks as well. So I said, okay, so I'm assuming this is pretty much just a dream world. This is kind of like the events even though there's truth to it, but it's kind of like showing us the events that led up to the suicide. But you know what I'm saying? But with obviously a physical representation of what pushed her to do what she did. Do you know what I'm saying? So,
Mhm.
which was, you know, the woman in the yard. So I still don't understand, and I was so close to watching movie ending explained when it comes to this, but I didn't want to because I just want to kind of like figure out myself and figure like what could everything could mean. But I'm still confused on the ending. Like, I'm just still confused on why, what like with the significance and what that represents. Like, yeah, I just don't understand. So,
So I think it just means it's a fantasy.
yeah, I
Like
get that.
it's in her imagination. And so as she's kind of probably bleeding out on the floor of the attic, she's imagining her perfect life. Right? The house has been renovated. It's got a name. They've been talking about the name of the farm at multiple times, right? The children are back. The dog is back. Everything is happy. Like she's been able to paint again. Like everything that's been mentioned throughout the movie comes to pass in that final 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
Mm.
So that is her fantasy as she is dying, I think.
I love the idea of that. But however, could we say the writing, like the whole concept of the writing, is strong enough to back that?
It's clearly there, right? It's very clearly in the movie. It's not just something that's just thrown in there to be weird, and it's also not something people are reading into it. It's clearly there. There's also, I think, one instance of writing where it's not reversed, and that is when she gets the condolence card. At one point, she goes through her mail and it's all bills, except for one letter, which is like a hyper generic, hyper non useful condolence card, like sending thoughts and prayers and healing thoughts or whatever, right? And it's like she kind of just shrugs it and says, like, what am I supposed to do with this? And I think the writing in that was the correct way around. That would indicate that that was real. And everything else could be a fantasy. Like some interpretations of this movie go so far as to say that the children are already dead. We basically see kind of the house is falling apart, the bills are piling up, she's not getting out of bed. There's dishes in the sink that have not been done for days. The electricity has been cut off. This is all consistent with her completely falling apart. And it could be that the children are still around and she's just unable to care for them. Or it could be that they have already either been taken away or maybe died in the accident or something. Right? They are not around and she's just fantasizing them because that's the last thing she can hold on to as normalcy. Right? But as she's doing it, kind of the reality of her collapsing life kind of closes in on her from all sides, and that is the condolence card. That's the fact that there's no neighbors, like there's no other characters in this. There are no neighbors who show up to offer help. And they talk about getting help from the neighbors, but it's a major thing. You have to like walk for miles or take the car to get to anybody else. So they are completely on their own, right? There's nobody who could help. There's apparently no other family that's pitching in, whatever, right? And then you've got like she's not paying the bills, she's not maintaining the house, she's not cleaning the dishes, she's completely unable to function. And it is like there's one interpretation, and I'm not convinced by this, but it's possible that the children are a fantasy as well. And that is why the thing about Annie writing the arse backwards is in there.
The reason why I could say that could be believable is because remember the scene when the woman in the yard showed her what would happen to her kids if she ended up letting go. And both of them graduated for university, I believe. So they were pretty much successful in life. They were happy, right? But then at the end, when she finally had the gun, obviously, and there were different scenes as well. When obviously obviously with the cushion scene when she stabbed the cushion, and then obviously with the daughter as well when she took her, and obviously with the son. Obviously, the dog number one was when the dog was number one. That's a hint as well. And then obviously with the daughter as well, her stabbing her over the cushion and her ending up back on the couch where she ended up stabbing her. It just the sticky part is the sun because I don't really see a scene where she ends up off in the sun. However, at the end, pretty much the woman in your shoulder, what would happen if she ended up letting the kids go? Pretty much that the kids are going to survive and they're going to grow up. However, at the end, she doesn't let them go because she ends up going with them in the house. So that told me, oh, okay, maybe it's the thing where she did end up killing them. It's because the woman you're telling them to let them go could be seen as those thoughts are telling her, do not kill the kids also, just off yourself. However, because the end shows that she ends up not letting go of the kids and the kids and the dog end up going into her house, you know, end up going into their house, that kind of told me, okay, maybe she didn't end up letting them go and she just took all of them with her.
But that's clearly a fantasy, right? And in her fantasy, her kids are with her.
But
Like, that's the perfect ending, but it's not real, and that's
yeah,
satisfied by the writing.
that's what I'm saying. That's the fantasy. The fantasy is no. I'm
Yeah.
not saying she killed her in the house. I'm saying the ending showed that she didn't let her kids go, and they all ended up dying with her. Because the scene before that, where the woman showed the kids growing up, when trying to pretty much, because when she asked the question about how her kids going to be if she leaves them, right, if she lets them go, and then the woman reinforced it and said no, they're going to be okay. And she showed them obviously them graduating from university. I'm just trying to defend the point about her being dead already. I thought her doing that was just trying to push her, because obviously that was just trying to push her to let go of the kids so she could off herself by herself. However, you could also say that those thoughts, even though those were her dark thoughts weren't too dark, because she could see that Ramona had other thoughts as well, which was to kill the kids. But but she was pretty much trying to say, no, your kids are going to be okay. So she kind of stopped. She tried to stop her as well as fulfilling her mission, which was to have her off herself. So what I'm trying to say, it sounds a bit convoluted. It still reinforces the idea of all of them being dead.
Or gone, right? Or in some other way not there.
Yeah. And this is why
Right? Like maybe they're staying with relatives, and Ramona's just falling apart alone in an empty building, and there's nobody,
True.
like in an empty house.
True.
And there's nobody around to help. It's also possible, right? And in her fantasy, like she's still clinging to the image of her children.
Yeah.
I don't actually like this interpretation. I like it more if she's still trying to be the mother, and she's still trying to care for them, and she just can't, and it's just too much, and then she just takes the. People say it's the easy way out, but I don't think there's anything easy about it. But she just gives up.
I still think it's a life. I actually think that the whole film is literally a life flashes before her eyes moment, especially at the end when the woman in the yard ends up merging with her when she's looking at herself in the mirror. So I just think it was just all of that. It was just a whole fantasy moment where that's the beginning, as in like her looking at herself in the mirror is the beginning. However, everything before that arguably was just a fantasy. And I don't know how do you feel about it if it was a fantasy rather than it being, just the woman in the yard actually being a mental representation. Well, no, not the woman in the yard actually being a physical being that the kids can see also.
Well, the entire thing is about her mental state, right? It's about her subjective experience. And so in that sense, it doesn't really matter if it's real or not. Like there's this whole thing about dream sequences, and if it was all a dream, does that mean nothing counted? The way you make that count is if the emotional journey of the character is what counts, right? If a character, like you've seen like episodes of TV shows or movies or whatever, where at the end it turns out to have all been a dream. Like Inception is one of these, right? Like Inception ends with him being reunited with his children, and the movie is ambiguous about whether or not it's still a dream or whether it's real. And one interpretation of that is it doesn't matter, because the character's emotional journey is what counts, and like where he ends up is the story, right? So it doesn't matter if it's real or not. Like similarly, if you have like a sitcom episode where like a character wakes up at the end, it was all a dream and the status quo is reset, but that character still had experiences and still felt things and still went on a journey, and that journey is real and those experiences are real, even though they didn't really happen in the show, like in the material reality of the show. So if this entire thing is a hallucination, or if, as you say, like life flashing before Ramona's eyes, I think that's fine. It doesn't really change the story, because it's her emotional journey that counts. And that's what matters, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
And the rest is kind of details.
Okay, so now I think we should kind of get into audience reactions, as in, like this.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So Rotten Tomatoes for this is 45%.
Yeah.
So normally, critics and audiences are not often in agreement. Often a movie will be loved by critics and hated by audiences, or the other way around. So that's the two scenarios, or everybody loves it or everybody hates it. Right? That's kind of what happens. Here it's like 45% for both.
Mm.
So people don't know what to make of this, and people are having very different reactions to what they're seeing. And lots of people don't like it.
Mm.
And I'm the big curmudgeon who kind of rejects this entire genre topic, right? And I walked away liking it.
Mm.
And it's interesting. And then other people are just rejecting this out of hand.
Which doesn't make sense to me.
So,
And it can't just be because it's Blumhouse, because people are used to, obviously the main complaint about Blumhouse is it's just generic, easy money horror movies, right, that they release. But it can't just be that, because can't you see when a movie's good, even though it's produced by, like, for example, Lionsgate, right? Lionsgate have produced some real dog poo over the years. However, they will have that one, like, for example, like in the midst of all the rubbish that they released John Wick Chapter 4. Amongst the rubbish that they release, and people realize, even though John Wick is already an established franchise, however, they could see the difference of quality from John Wick in comparison to all the rubbish that they released. Do you know what I'm saying? So can't people see the gold in the dirt when it comes to this movie? So I'm just confused why people saying like this is a rubbish film, like their reason for this. But this is not a rubbish film. This has been this is a brain picker, number one, and this has been like, this movie has more substance and more layers when it comes to the horror genre compared to like any other horror film that I've seen in the past. I'm trying to think of a horror film that had this much stuff, like, that had me thinking the way that, this film has. But in the past couple of years. So I don't get it. I don't understand how people think this is rubbish.
yeah. So I think it's a few things. One of them is just it's Blumhouse. Like, Blumhouse has a reputation, it has a brand, and people expect certain things. Like, the teenagers that I saw this with, who thought this was funny, certainly were primed to expect a certain thing from a Blumhouse movie, right? And they could not make the pivot. They could not figure out, okay, we expected one thing, and we had good reasons for expecting that thing, but it's clearly something else. And, we're getting into it. They didn't, right? At least the people sitting right behind me who were treating this like some generic slasher schlock or something like that. Another one is that the trailer is terrible. Like, the trailer makes it look like generic horror movie, like gimmicky horror monster, scared people walking around an empty house. It's dark. There's a noise, right? The trailer makes it look like this. So I don't blame people for expecting this, right? It's just, once you've seen it, even if you don't like it, can't you recognize that this is something else?
Yeah.
And the criticism that I've seen a lot is, oh, the woman is not scary. Like, that's just somebody in a sheet. Like, how is this scary? Like, where's the monster? And it's like, have you not heard of like psychological horror before? Can you not realize that this is about a person's emotional state and a person breaking down under the weight of her grief and her responsibilities and so on? A lot of people don't seem to be able to make that leap. Like, if somebody says, like, I've criticized the metaphor for not quiet singing, and I can see somebody saying that is just a deal breaker. Like, in order for this to be a great movie, the metaphor has to work. And I'm kind of in that camp, but I realize kind of what works about this movie, and I give it credit for that. But so many people don't even get that far, right? People are saying this is just stupid. Like, a woman sitting on a chair, how is that? That's not a movie monster. 0 out of 5, right? That's the level of engagement. And I've got a little bit of a rant, if you will allow me. There's this whole meta debate about the future of movies and the future of cinemas and the box office, and about how some people will say movie studios are only feeding us franchise slop. Like, that's everybody's favorite word now. It's just all sequels, it's all reboots, it's all IP. And then other people will point out, well, original movies get made, but nobody shows up to them. And then other people say, well, just make good movies and we'll see them. And I'm kind of in that camp a little bit, where I say, yes, there are original movies, but a lot of them are not very good. And the hit rate is too low for people to really take a lot of chances on cinemas. And the whole thing is a death spiral where mediocre movies lead to lower attendance, which leads to more mediocre movies, which leads to lower attendance. And, I think that's kind of the dynamic that we're in. But showing up to Avengers 8 is like, you can kind of expect what kind of experience to get from that. So I think that goes a long way towards explaining why audiences show up mostly for franchise movies, and that is why studios therefore mostly make franchise movies. But if you care about movies at all, I think on some level you have to put yourself out there a little bit sometimes, where you have to say, okay, this movie is maybe I will not like this movie. But, like, you cannot discover new stories if you never give any new stories a chance, and if you have an attitude where you cannot give a movie the benefit of the doubt, even if like there's positive reviews, like every review I've seen of this is positive. All of them love this movie that I've seen. Like they all say, "Oh, this is great. This is not your typical, Blumhouse nonsense. Like this is an actually a great story." And audiences are just not having it. Like on balance, like this has made so far $10 million. So this is probably going to flop, right? Even with good word of mouth, it will not get over 20, but it needs at least 30 to break even, like 28, 30, something like that. So this is not going to, like, this will probably be a cult hit in a few years, where like the people who know it really like it, but people have generally ignored it. But this is a competently made movie, terrifically acted, well written. It's got some flaws here, like they should have polished the metaphor a little bit, whatever. But this is a proper movie. This is what we're asking for. And I'm like, I'm absolutely fed up with lazy social commentary and broken metaphors and self-important movies that think just by mentioning a heavy topic that's job done, right? Like Wolfman was an example of this just a few months ago, where the metaphor and the story simply, they were at right angles to each other, right? They simply did not have anything to do with each other. Presence had some neat ideas, but it didn't really do justice to the idea of a family that's falling apart. What else did we have in horror? Just gonna bring up a list. The Monkey, absolutely hated that. Self-important, pretentious nonsense as far as I was concerned. So there's this entire genre of trauma-based horror movies, right? That deal with generational trauma, abuse, abusive parenting, these kinds of things. And in my opinion, most of them don't do a good job dealing with these topics. Wicked was another one, which I think it's like the most superficial treatment of racism I've ever seen. It's like just so childish, but everybody loves it. Like I have quite high standards for this, and this is like an 8 out of 10. Like in terms of, does it get there? There's like small criticisms I have, but overall I can see that this movie is heads and shoulders above all its peers, and yet so many people seem to not accept it. It's weird. I actually saw Never Let Go the other day, right? This is like this Halle Berry movie about a family living in a forest, and the gimmick is that there are monsters in the woods, and they will get you unless you are tied to the house with a rope. And the idea is you can never let go, right? And I actually watched it, and it's actually quite good. I did not enjoy it because of its subject matter, but I recognize its quality. But that movie was completely ignored as well. And if you like this sort of movie and you want to see it well done, like Never Let Go goes in a similar vein. I think I would say it's even slightly better than this in terms of execution. People always talk about how much they care about these topics and about how they want movies and horror specifically to explore like the darker side of the human condition and the human mind. And then something comes along that actually does it properly and nobody cares.
That pisses me off. Really pisses me off. Everything's subjective. We have our likes and we have our dislikes. I understand. But this movie, even though it presented itself terribly, because like I said, we watched the trailer, we said this was very generic. However, the movie showed enough, and it did enough, and it had enough that showed that this is not a generic Blumhouse film. So I would have expected that from people that just saw the trailer. I would have expected these opinions of the movie being bad for people that actually didn't see the movie, they just saw the trailer. However, for people that actually saw the movie, and they still said that this was a bad movie, and the reason that they gave is because it's not scary, come on, man.
And I wonder what would have happened if the trailer had made it clear what this movie was about. Like, in my view, like the studios think a trailer's purpose is to sell as many tickets as possible, right? To get butts and seats, right? That's the goal of a trailer. But I think that's actually short-sighted and actually self-defeating. What it should actually do is help the movie's audience find the movie, right? So people who will enjoy this movie and make them aware of the movie and convince them to buy a ticket.
Yeah.
And then those people will like it and then will recommend it and so on, right? If you just try to sell as many tickets as possible in the first weekend, most people are not going to like it and it's going to go down in history as a bad movie. And yes, congratulations, you made a bunch of money, but it's not sustainable. And I wonder what would have happened if this trailer had really hammered home what this was about. Like, make this actually about like somebody who is on the brink of suicide because of her grief. And the woman in the yard is kind of not the monster, right? Because she's not she's kind of a monster, but she's a manifestation of this emotion, right? Which is what a lot of movie monsters are. But like for most of the movie, she's not attacking, right? And I think like she's not an active threat. She's more like an omen, like a sign of things to come, and then a manifestation of Ramona's mental state. But she's not not a threat, and that is different from most other horror movies. And the trailer should have communicated that so that people go in with the right expectations. And I think that there's a large part of it too. Like, I think this movie deserves better. This was never going to make $100 million, $200 million, right? This is too niche for that. It's too heavy for that, right? This is not a crowd pleaser. But this should have gotten a much better reaction than it did, I think, because it's just that well done, and it knows what it wants to be, and it kind of does that to the best of its ability, and it stumbles a few times, but that's saying much more, like much more than just like 90% of horror movies.
And I'm just kind of scared of the direction of, what's going to happen to originals. I think it's going to push people to kind of like be scared to take a risk, which I hope not. But if the audience reacted this way, then can we blame filmmakers now or not? Especially production companies for now just investing in.
This was never going to be kind of the linchpin of movies, right? But it's just one more confirmation to movie studios that audiences don't actually want this, right? If they did, then they would have shown up in larger numbers.
And what's pissed me off is I believe you're right in terms of it's going to become like a more, you say, cult classic or something like that in the future.
I'm sure of it. Yeah. Like in 5 years, 10 years from now, this will show up on hidden gems lists where people say, "Oh, you gotta watch this," and people will look at like the box office and say, "Oh yeah, this flopped at the time, but it's become a cult classic since then." I'm sure of it.
Yeah, it pisses me off. People just don't appreciate stuff now, but that is what it is. But is there anything else that you want to mention?
I think we've covered it.
It's fine. This discussion pissed me off. But okay, last thoughts. All in all, I thought this was a really good movie. Because I haven't even though I did say in the previous discussion in terms of like Paycheck that film was a brain pick as well, but I think this one definitely, I haven't actually just sat down and thought about a film, especially a psychological horror film, for a very long time. Because a lot of movies nowadays, pretty generic, you know what's gonna happen. I'm not saying generic is bad, because I've watched a lot of generic movies, which is fine. I just enjoyed just thinking about the events that's going on. I enjoyed nitpicking and just, trying to make sense of what was going on. So I really enjoyed this film. I was gonna give it an 8. I'm gonna give it's touching an 8 for me. Even though it wasn't perfect, and we discussed, the issues are surrounding obviously the film and the events that were going on, and the way that it was conveyed, certain, metaphors and allegories, the way that it was presented. However, they had an idea and it was executed 70% of the way, and it was an idea which was different from the rest in terms of kind of like its genre. I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's like one of a kind psychological horror movies. We have had many good psychological horror movies, but I don't think we've seen one this good in terms of like it can pick the brain, like the way that me and Daniel were discussing, like trying to think about different things that could have happened. I don't think we've had that in a very long time when it comes to this genre. I don't think. Can you recall of a film, Daniel? Because we've done quite a lot of horrors. I don't think there's been one that we've had this kind of conversation.
I don't think there's been one where it's really open to interpretation what even is real. And normally I'm not the biggest fan of that. I'd like things to be a little bit more literal, and I just like a movie to present me with a situation and characters that navigate those situations and so on. That's kind of movie I like. So the entire thing being a fantasy or a hallucination potentially is not something that really endears me to a movie.
I see.
But yeah, here it kind of works.
But yeah, I'm his opposite. I definitely enjoy this type of things. But man. But like I said, overall, this was a very good movie, and I disagree wholeheartedly with audience reactions to other people's reactions to this film. So do not listen to the Wahala if you want to go watch this movie. Actually, go and watch this movie. I believe you want to go watch it again. I just don't know when, but I'm definitely gonna go watch this again because I feel like we're missing something, and I want to figure it out before I watch movie ending explain.
Yeah, so this movie had an uphill battle with me for a number of different reasons, and it won me over. I think it's well acted. I think the metaphor stumbles in a few different places, although I'm reserving judgment that it might come together on rewatch. It's quite good. Like I'd like for the middle to be tightened up a little bit, but what we got was, I think, one of the better horror movies in a while. For me, probably the best one since Quiet Place Day One. That was also very introspective, very emotional. That one really got to me. And this one didn't so much get to me as I appreciated what it was doing. So overall, that's a backwards R out of 5 for me. It just lands. It just works. I wish it landed just a little bit better, but it does what it needs to be. It tries to be something distinctive. It, for the most part, is very true to like what it wants to be. So yeah, it's overall it's worth a watch. It's definitely better than its reputation.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. Thank you very much for tuning into this week's episode.
And if you like this video, tell a friend. And if you hated this video, tell an enemy. Either way helps us with the algorithm.
You heard it here first, guys. Comment down below also what you thought of Woman in the Yard. Do you agree with what we said, or do you think what we said was complete caca? Well, anyways, we'll catch you next week, guys. Thank you very much. Au revoir.
Bye bye.